Hi, I'm Lisa Jordan from the Shine campaign, and I'm here today with Sherwin from Energy Peace Partners, and I'm really excited, Sherwin, to have a conversation with you about the work that you're doing. Will you tell us a little bit about Energy Peace Partners and its mission, please?
Absolutely, Lisa. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you and talk about our work. So we are Energy Peace Partners. We're a new organization. We're less than a year old. I co-founded it with two partners. And essentially, our work revolves around the notion that climate solutions can support peace in some very challenging places, in places that are conflict affected and crisis affected. So our work is really built around, and our mission is to create a kind of enabling environment to facilitate renewable energy and renewable energy transitions in these really challenging places. What we ultimately want to do, our vision, is to kind of expand the current international community's toolkit for managing conflict. Expand our tools that we use for building peace and promoting peace in really challenging places. And that's our vision. And so we've been slowly but surely building alliances and partnerships to help us achieve that mission.
So Sherwin, the reason I wanted to ask you to come and have this conversation with me is because I did not understand the connectivity between renewable energy, dirty fuels, conflict areas, and I didn't really understand how that played out until I heard your story about the South Sudan. And I think I want to just go right there. If you could explain a little bit about how fuels that conflict and what you think might be a possible solution to it. Could you tell us a little bit about the story in South Sudan?
Sure, I can. Let me give you a little context before I jump right into South Sudan. So we were incubated at a program at UC Berkeley, and we looked at the connections between conflict, climate change, and energy poverty. And we found a few things. We found that climate change is really exacerbating conflict. We're living in a period where there are 66 million people displaced in the world. The international community is spending $40 to $50 billion addressing the humanitarian and peace crises in the world. At the same time, we observe that many of these countries that are conflict affected, climate vulnerable, are energy poor. They have electricity penetration rates of less than 20%. At the same time, many of these countries have international interventions. There are international field operations, humanitarian aid, or peace operations, like in South Sudan, that are deployed to address the crises. And we also found that these operations, because they're frequently deployed to remote locations, are entirely diesel dependent frequently. And so our work involves looking at how to bring new renewable energy investment into these places, leveraging the international footprint, because we are already on the ground in some of these really energy-poor, conflict-affected places. However, our international operations there are diesel-dependent because they were deployed quickly to save lives and address crises, but crises and conflicts become protracted, so 5, 10, 15 years down the line, these international operations are still there, and they're still burning expensive and dirty diesel, like in South Sudan. South Sudan is the least electrified country in the world. There are two international operations there. There's a humanitarian aid operation and there's a peacekeeping operation. Together, those operations spend $2.5 billion to power their operations. And those are the entire budgets of those two international missions there. At the same time, we have done some research into South Sudan. So the international community pays the highest energy costs in the world in South Sudan, frequently because they have to transport fuel, imported fuel, or locally procured fuel to remote locations. So in a place like Malakal in northeastern South Sudan, fuel has to be flown in. It costs between $2 to $3 a liter, between $8 to $9 a gallon. That's very, very expensive.
And that fuel then is vulnerable. It becomes a commodity in this conflict area.
Absolutely. So the international community is not independent. They don't have energy independence. They sometimes import fuel, like peacekeeping operations, but many international organizations, humanitarian organizations, have to procure fuel locally. So coming back to your question, is in South Sudan, diesel is a scarce commodity. It's imported by the government. It is subsidized by the government. There is an official market price for diesel, but there has emerged a black market for diesel where traders sell diesel at a higher price. And it's a very scarce commodity. There are often shortages. And when the international community and individual humanitarian organizations procure diesel locally, the people that profit from those are frequently aligned with the elites in power, and that local procurement of diesel perpetuates the exact conflict dynamics that we're trying to mitigate. And so that is information that we have anecdotally about South Sudan, but we also understand that those same dynamics, when international humanitarian organizations procure diesel locally, they do it in places like northern Nigeria, in Syria, in other places where it perpetuates the war economy. And so one of the benefits of transitioning from diesel to renewable energy in these places is that it allows a certain amount of independence for our international interventions there, and it eliminates the fact that we are actually contributing to the exact conflict and crisis that we are there to address.
So one of the other pieces of your story that I thought was really interesting and is the role that independent energy resources, clean energy resources, can play in terms of that transition from a conflict area to a peace situation. And maybe you could just illuminate for our friends a little bit about how clean energy can become a development dividend, if you will, in the move from conflict to peace.
Sure. So we are very directly making the link that renewable energy can promote existing interventions that support peace. So that's not to say that I have a solar wand that I can wave magically and the new renewable energy mini grid is going to make conflict parties, drop their weapons. So that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about at all. But we believe there are certain positive pro-peace benefits to renewable energy transitions in places like South Sudan, Mali, Central African Republic, Darfur. So for example, immediately after a peace agreement is signed, there's a period in which the conflict parties and the communities expect to see tangible benefits from signing up to a peace accord, right? So that is a small window in which peace dividends can be delivered, and because of the technology, because distributed energy solutions now are there, can be deployed quickly, that is one way in which the international community can deliver peace dividends immediately after an agreement is signed, for example. Another example, and again, I look at this from a conflict lens because that's been my professional work over the last 20 years or so. When you build renewable energy assets, when you build renewable energy infrastructure, it is a hook and it is an angle to get conflict parties to cooperate, right? So if you're talking about a mini grid in Malakal, in South Sudan, that is helping an affected population, that is a tool in which you can get conflict parties to sit around the table and talk about, well, who's going to manage that asset? Who's going to oversee it? If there's revenue generated from that asset, how are we going to manage it? Who's going to benefit from that asset? So it increases the impact and it expands the tools that people working on the ground that are working on confidence building between communities have. So in addition to those, there are clearly, as we've talked about at this conference, the developmental benefits from increasing energy access to local communities. There are lighting, communication, safety, security, jobs created, economic opportunities catalyzed that come from that new renewable energy investment in these places. And then two important things. We believe that new renewable energy assets that can be installed, for example, in these international field operations can introduce energy infrastructure that can be the building blocks for future utilities in these places. It's not happening now. However, we have international footprints that are secure locations that have energy budgets to pay for energy. So those assets can be transitioned in a more stable phase, for example, in South Sudan, where there's a civil war that is going on right now. But in a more stable phase, the asset can be transitioned and can help in the post-reconstruction recovery phase. Because the way it works now is that when a mission draws down, essentially the assets are redeployed.
Right.
If assets are left behind, what is it? It's a diesel generator that requires fuel and maintenance. However, if it is a mini grid that's been there for a while, that can be transitioned to the local community, and it's already there.
Right.
It can help with the next phase of reconstruction rather than starting from scratch.
Right. So, you know, Shine has a number of members who are deeply engaged in conflict zones, in providing resources for refugees, in pulling people out of conflict zones, and also in trying to negotiate peace. We have a lot of faith coalitions engaged in Shine, and I would really like to hear from you, and this will be our last question, how you can get the attention of people who are in that NGO community, in those faith communities, who are serving folks who are in conflict. How can you get their attention to say, look, this is a really important part that can help spur peace, it can help actually catalyze a change in people's lives? What's the plan to get their attention? Because you know they're under pressure, they're in the hot zone, if you will, really trying to deal with a whole series of very difficult issues.
Sure, understandable. I mean, a lot of the things we've been discussing at this conference has been how to increase the energy access for the 1 billion people.
Yeah.
Right? So many of those 1 billion people live in fragile, conflict-affected places.
Yeah.
So why do we have an interest in delivering renewable energy solutions and increasing access for those people? There are a number of reasons, right? We have an interest in stable societies. We have seen in our recent history that conflicts and crises do not know borders, that crises spill over into neighboring countries, stress natural resources. We have seen in Europe with the amount of refugees that have transitioned, that have migrated there, that this is a global problem. So one clear reason why we have an interest in expanding our toolkit to include renewable energy is because we need all the tools at our disposal to help create peaceful, stable societies. It also is a way for the international community to align our commitments. So we have many commitments. We have climate commitments, we have peace-building commitments, we have development commitments. But all those commitments are not entirely coherent. So renewable energy in really fragile places provides a way for us to align our values in a very, very powerful way.
So, and that's at least 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals right there,
Absolutely.
which could actually be realized by providing access to energy. Sherwin, I want to thank you. I want to thank your co-founders. And I want to thank you most especially for the work that you're doing, which is very moving and really interesting, and I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you,
so
Lisa.
thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.